Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Policy and Oversight Board meeting this evening. My name is Councillor Lisa Homan and I chair the Policy and Oversight Board. Before we start on the formal agenda, just a few housekeeping points. And given that we are in a different venue for this meeting, people might want to take note of where the fire exits and whatnot are. This meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. So by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. Could I ask officers and guests, because I think we have guests here talking to us tonight, if you could introduce yourself the first time that you address the committee. If there's a fire alarm, please leave by the nearest exit and take instruction from the security officers. My understanding is this fire exit is located to the double side doors to the car park, the main door to reception, which is straight ahead, and a rear door on the ground floor next to the toilet. So I think you've got quite a lot of ways of getting out. And the assembly point is outside of St. Peter's School, which is at the front of the building to the right. And toilets can be found at Clockwork Reception. So that's the housekeeping bits done. I'm now going to move on to the agenda. And could I firstly ask if we have any apologies for absence? Thank you very much. I think everybody else is here. Are there any declarations of interest? Anybody got anything to declare in relation to the items that we're discussing this evening? No.
Sorry, Chair, on the previous, I think Councillor Nicole has sent her apologies for the lateness.
Oh,
Yes.
Councillor
Green, yes.
Councillor Trace for lateness,
Yes.
so we are expecting her.
Yes.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. In that case, let's move to the minutes of the previous meeting. Could I ask the committee if there are any matters arising from the minutes of the meeting, which was held on Wednesday, the 18th of September? No, there are a number of actions which I think have been circulated from that meeting. Has everybody had a chance to have a look at it? And are those questions that you raised, for example, Councillor Vaughan, are you satisfied that you've now had a response to the points?
I think one of them was to, yeah, by the looks of it, one of them was to give us more information in due course.
Yeah. Any other matters from the actions? No? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is an update on AI adoption and governance. And the committee will remember that we previously looked at this, and it was really a start of a look at what the council were doing in terms of trying to use AI to our advantage, but also recognising that whilst there are opportunities, there are risks. And I think the report that we have got in front of us this evening will show that we've actually moved quite a long way since that last report. So I'd like to welcome, I think, Tina Akpong-Kanita, if I've pronounced that right, to introduce the report. And I think we've then got a guest speaker, Sam Nutt, who is researcher and data ethicist at LOTO, the London Office of Technology and Innovation, to talk to us about some of the things that other councils are doing. And we've also got our digital expert, Councillor Chopier-Verdier, who will also make a contribution, and I'm sure Councillor Ree. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Homan. Could we please have the first slide? So as Councillor Homan mentioned, hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the briefing that was circulated. The aim of the slides is just to provide some brief headlines so that we can have a focused discussion. So the first slide is covering our journey so far. I won't cover the bits from November 2022 because we went through them in the last session. So today's session is about bringing POB an update on developing a structured approach to AI governance. POB also wanted to hear real world examples about what other local authorities are doing in this arena. And it's also to give you a bit of an update on our progress so far. So in terms of key milestones, so we've taken a strategic approach in terms of adopting a more formal structure around our generative AI working group. So we formally established it. We've made sure that other services are aware of the existence of the working group. We've included them in the formation of the working group going forward. We've also enabled Microsoft Copilot for Edge, which is Copilot for the Microsoft browser, so that staff across the whole council can start to familiarize themselves with the technology. Obviously, it's a more limited license, but it's a free license. We've also developed a comprehensive AI governance framework. So that is integrated into our current processes. And we're still doing further research into what we would need to do once we start to get to the point where we're adopting large-scale uses of AI or using it in resident-facing activities. So we're researching different approaches, for example, looking at ethics boards, etc. We've also had a chance, I think, to firm up our approach, because we initially started with piloting Microsoft Copilot for individuals. So that was just to start to understand the technology and just get to know what it can and can't do for the organization as a whole. So having done that since the beginning of this year, our view is that actually H&F would probably benefit from more purpose-built tools and from tools that are integrated into the systems that various services to do their work. Because if you take that approach, teams and departments and the council as a whole can benefit. But actually, if you're only using it for an individual, only that person benefits. We've also rolled out a number of use cases, so those are still in progress. Resident services have been using Microsoft Copilot for Word to help support their complaints management process. Our social care departments are exploring AI-assisted solutions to generating education, health and care plans. And both services are investigating using AI to assist them with note-taking while they're engaging with their clients, so that they don't have to focus on writing, they can just focus on the individuals. Next slide, please. We were also asked to look at what other local authorities were doing. So that's been, I think every council is engaging in that activity. Sam can probably give you more information about that. But actually, we found that we're all on a similar adoption path, and everyone in our sector is starting small. We haven't seen any large-scale use cases to date. So we've got some examples of other councils making progress in AI adoption. So Westminster City Council has implemented a generative AI solution to handle over 30,000 waste-related issues raised by residents. Derby City Council are looking at implementing AI capabilities across multiple services, but working with a strategic partner. And Wigan Council are doing the same, but they're also in the very early days. I think in closing, I just wanted to emphasize that in order for the council to benefit from AI technologies, we need to make sure that our data is AI ready, and we also need to manage the costs. So for example, we need to continue our work to raise data literacy levels across the council and to make sure that we steward the use of our data. We also need to make sure that the costs are controlled, because the technology is very, very expensive at the moment. And because people, the services are so interested, we sort of need to have a strategic approach. So we're taking some options on the various approaches we could take to manage the cost, but still benefit from the technology to SLT, so that they can give us a steer. and then we'll progress. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sam Nutt, welcome to the committee. You obviously have a bit of an overview on London on this issue, so maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
for sure, Percy. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Sam. I'm the researcher and data ethicist at LOTI. We're the London Office of Technology and Innovation. Hence, we have a very good acronym, LOTI. We're a membership organisation, so we have a few slides to go through. We're a membership organisation. We were created 5 years ago by 14 of the boroughs, I think, including Hammersmith and Fulham. Were one of the early joiners, early adopters, so good at adoption in Hammersmith and Fulham. And we're up to 28 of the boroughs of London now. So if we go to the next slide, we're an innovation, a collaborative innovation community. So with my hat, I lead on data ethics, but also on AI, emerging technology, other considerations. So in the process of that, it's helping boroughs individually when they have something that we could come in and help solve with the learnings from other councils, but often it's working collectively where there's a common problem, and rather than try and solve it 30 times individually in London or 300 times collectively across the country, we can better collaborate, solve it maybe once for good for everyone. So that's kind of how we work. So I'll talk a little bit about AI. And there are three things. I'm going to mention almost the conclusion at the start, because I think it's best to keep these in mind when I go through some of the examples and some of our research. The first thing, as Tim was saying, I think the technology isn't the barrier to adoption. It's things like data, it's things like skills. I'm really big, especially on design skills. I think that's really important if we're thinking about how we adopt these things. What does that actually mean about the services and how they're transforming? The technology, I don't think, with generative AI especially, is the big barrier to adoption. The second bit, and I'll mention in a second some good research on this, but procurement, I think, is where a lot of the decisions around AI are happening in councils. We're mostly buyers. We don't have huge teams of data scientists. If we're lucky, we maybe have one in a council. So I think being really good at procurement is important. And exactly as Tim was saying, in terms of the costs are so big at the moment for adopting, we have to be really rigorous, I think, with the evaluation piece and sharing wherever possible. And I think that's where LOTI come in, sharing the learnings from other councils so we don't have to do 30 pilots that maybe all cost, in the 5-figure range with the same company, the same technology, very similar use cases. Can we sort of do that for much cheaper across all of the boroughs in London, but also share those learnings? So if we go on to some of the examples, well, here's some research from LOTI, so internal surveys. I run a couple of AI networks and events, and the LGA also did a national survey earlier in 2024. So some of the findings for that. The three main reasons cited by councils, and this probably isn't going to be a huge surprise, but it's good to have the rigor behind it, in terms of wanting to adopt AI around efficiencies and saving money, cutting costs. That's the first by a long way. And then improving resident experiences of services and improving the jobs of staff. So that's partly thinking about productivity, but also one of the things we've seen coming up in the last few months as Copilot and Gemini usage has come up is actually big gains in terms of accessibility, inclusion with some of these tools. As I said, we're mostly buyers. In that LGA survey, 63% of councils said they were already buying AI solutions from external providers. So we really think procurement is a lever that we should be focusing on. The most common function, I guess, in terms of use case in particular in that LGA survey, they called corporate council roles, but especially things like HR or admin and meeting minutes, where there are standardized types of documents, and you can really train the outputs of generative AI models to produce those things quite well. So let's say meeting minutes, summarizations of those sorts of things. That's how I use it in particular. And you can sort of transpose that into different roles, what that might be. Obviously, they all come with their own contextual considerations. The service areas that we've seen councils most interested in, I think health and social care is the big one, 43%. And interestingly, advice and benefits, interesting, so keep that in mind, 36%. And then looking at planning and housing, I think in line a little bit, I suppose, with where our services are, where the costs are. If we go to the next slide, I've got a few examples. I've got lots of examples in my head, but obviously time limited. I'll mention a few that we've seen from councils. So the AI social care assistance, this is a really common use case. There's a company called Beam who have a tool called Magic Notes that I think 11 councils are piloting or started a pilot. And that basically transcribes and summarizes and outputs it into a form in the format that the council officer, that normally a frontline social worker, has indicated they'd like it in, and then that's emailed to them. So then the social worker has effectively to check that that is the correct text before they put it into the case management system. So that's one. I said that point on evaluation really important because this has been a tricky tool to evaluate the productivity gains on, but the most optimistic one I've seen is it saves 15 hours per month for a caseworker. So if that's true, it's big potential savings. But also we've seen for that one is the workers who do have access to the tool have found incredible joy, and they've enjoyed their job a lot more. And so the councils who provided it in the pilot are really reticent to remove it because these are social workers who often haven't been given a fancy new bit of technology first in a council and loved it. So that's a really interesting one. Tina mentioned the waste reporting chatbot in Westminster. So uses a combination of image recognition AI as well as a chatbot. And originally they were using a proper large language model for the chatbot, but they realized they could sort of save a lot of money and also on the energy costs as well, thinking for the climate impact. If they use a much smaller language model, compromise slightly on the performance of the model, but actually save so much money and energy. So that's some very interesting and quite strategic thinking from the actual data scientists involved in that. But they've gotten down the time to report on average to 80 seconds, any waste in the council. Harrow, they're using computer vision as another type of AI on top of a digital twin. So they basically got a Google Street View map of the council, of the borough. And in a pilot they did in 3 of the wards, they used the AI to basically see in their map of the borough all of the different signage to see what signs were paying business rates and what signs weren't paying business rates. In 3 of the wards, they identified additional revenue of up to £48,000 across the 3. And then the last one, I think the big one, and this is the conversation that comes up the most, is on the Microsoft Copilot and the Google equivalent, which is Gemini, adopting that as integrated into all of the products. We have a working group in Lottie, and the big thing at the moment, as I was saying, is on the evaluation bit. And I guess there's 2 bits that we're seeing on that, which is that there's a lot of benefit, especially for the meetings, for the transcribing, for the summarization. Realizing the benefits outside of that is actually being a lot more tricky. And so there's big adoption considerations, how we do that. They're very expensive licenses. They're about, I think it's about £300 per person per year. And Microsoft very much encouraged to buy lots of licenses, of course. So that's a big cost to not actually know, is this, saving us money, that sort of thing. So evaluation, really, really important. We go to the next slide. Before I go on to some of the ethics stuff, I think it's really important to ground it in what the public think. And that's, I think, partly our responsibility in councils. That's how I work as ethicists, to trying to relate the values of the public and the people we're representing to our practices. I think the first thing to say, and I always say this is my opening point, is basically government is the second least trusted actor when it comes to using people's data, only ahead of social media companies. And that's DCIT research. I think that's a pretty poor starting point. I think the one that stands out to me, I think 36% of people, only 36% of people trust government to be transparent with data. And I think it's 42%, if I remember, think that 41%, not even 42, think that we're using data for the benefit of society. So even when we have it, most people don't actually think we're using it for good. The public is generally split into optimists, pessimists, and people who don't know a lot about it. But actually the sentiment is trending negatively. So when the initial wave came out 18 months ago of ChatGPT 3 and those sorts of products, people were more positive about it. And actually, I think really important on this, though, is whilst there is general sentiment, there are very much different opinions for different use cases. So the most positive being around healthcare and actually healthcare research, but the least positive, actually the very least positive is political campaigning. But above that, it's welfare provision and assessing benefits. So I think kind of the call to action on that is in local government, it's not enough to just say people high level think this or that. I think we need to be much more active engaging with our residents, maybe around some of these use cases as they're emerging, to understand what their concerns might be. And I guess if it doesn't go well, this is my sort of be scared slide. It can go badly. And I've been kind that I haven't included any examples from local government here. But it can go wrong for us. And I think it's really important, I guess, from the perspective of not causing harms or not being biased, but also I think reputationally it can go wrong, and we need to be really on top of these things from the start. So what we do, and I guess in my role as data ethicist supporting our members, if we go to the next slide, we have a big ethics capabilities framework, but originally those slides were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you'll have to imagine they succeed like that. I've kind of tried to distill, these are the 5 things I tell councils when I go into there to speak with them about ethics, especially at the start of their journey, starting with sort of common ethical principles. So these are things you might embed in a data strategy or an AI strategy. These principles have been written, rewritten by lots of different people, and they pretty much all say the same thing wherever you read them. These are the government's responsible AI principles, and I think that's probably the safest bet to use. Safety, security, robustness. So this is around sort of the reliability of your models, and also ensuring that the data, for example, can't be accessed by nefarious actors. You're being very careful with that. Transparency and explainability. I think, especially thinking with residents, certain AI things that may be impacting residents, how can we ensure that they're aware of what we're doing, but also we can explain it to them, whatever their level of digital data literacy might be. Fairness is a really big one. And there's a technical side of fairness, and there's legislation around fairness, but fairness is also a much bigger, open-ended moral question that the law doesn't always perfectly prescribe an answer for. So that's a really important one to always be navigating consciously. And then the last 2, I suppose, are quite linked, but there's the accountability and governance. I think, especially for us in local government, making sure it's consistent across the whole organisation is very difficult with our silos, but really important. And on top of that, the contestability and redress, if you can imagine into the future where maybe there's more and more use of AI informing the decisions we might be making as a council. If we make an incorrect decision, how would a resident perhaps contest that, or what would be the means of redress around that? So they're the government's principles, I think, start there. And then I guess the 4 things I just think practically easy to get to grips with. There's lots of legislation, and there's new legislation apparently coming out soon around AI, but there's the UK GDPR, there's the public sector equalities duty that we all have, there's human rights legislation. I think if you're compliant, that's a huge part of the journey. These are all bits of legislation based on moral values, so I think it's a really big start, and that gets you most of the way there. I keep mentioning procurement. I think if you can especially, make sure you're asking the questions that would get you to be answering those ethical principles, embedding that in your procurement process, that's a really big step. The evaluation bit, as I mentioned, that engagement with residents and also staff as well, I think is a big piece in the adoption. There are concerns that staff have, but also staff have lots of ideas about how we can adopt those things better. So I think they're always the things, I guess, to start with. I'll maybe quickly mention a couple of good examples that we've helped with in terms of the ethics in other councils. Brent have a data ethics advisory board, and we helped set that up, and I've evaluated that. And that's an interesting one because it's sort of a combination of different staff from within the council and also a few external residents with various relevant experience and expertise. And then Camden, they have a data charter, which they created through a couple of citizen assemblies, so a much bigger process of engagement, set out some principles. Effectively, if you read it, there are 8 principles, but it's basically those just worded, spread out slightly differently. And on top of that, a set of recommendations for the council to follow around some of their data practices. So that's sort of on the public engagement side. That's another thing that we help with in Lottie. So on the ethics side, I think it's a lot more, we're playing catch up a little bit with the technology, but that's kind of why my role was created by the councils to help them with that. So yeah, they're sort of the things that other councils are doing. As I say, I think the main messages were around, it's not about the technology per se, but it's about getting everything else right to adopt it well. And I think really focusing on the procurement bits and the evaluation bits are my main lessons. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to ask councillors who are a member of the board now if they've got any particular questions, and I'll bring our sort of councillors with responsibility for this in. Any questions, anybody particular?
Yes.
Councillor Perez. Sorry.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Tina and Sam, for report and the presentation. I note from the report that there's a references the importance of public trust and how it's essential for the successful integration of AI technologies. So I want to know, what are we doing in Hammersmith and Fulham to nurture that public trust? And is this process being co-produced, or is it early stages for that to happen, or please tell us a little bit more? Thank you.
So at the moment, the use cases are very small. We're trying to keep them very contained. We are then going to be looking at what are the options for making sure that we're building public trust through once we start to scale up with larger use cases. Yes, we have co-production at Hammersmith and Fulham. I think there are various options we could use. I think it's also important to note that on the ethics side, it's important to be able to give individuals appropriate training to make sure that they're also equipped with the decision-making side. Obviously, yes, you want to make a decision as an individual and as a resident, but then there are other complexities that we've sort of started to look at, and we thought actually it would help to also include training for anyone who is involved in decision-making. For now, we've just kept the process compliant, as Sam said, tried to make sure everything is compliant, everything is secure. We have the option to go through digital board, which has just been reinstated and is comprised of SLT members as well as other colleagues who are here. So you have that route, you know, if we were in a position where we had to make maybe some robust decisions. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much. Tina, thank you very much for the report, and Sam, that was really, really interesting. Thank you. I am Chair of Housing and Homelessness Policy and Accountability Committee, so my interest is very much in how it's being used in the housing and the kind of the rent departments. And I completely applaud the kind of the ambition to move really slowly when it comes to anything in which residents could be penalised in any way. If the slower we move with that, the better, and the more kind of flags we have, more ways of raising flags when that might not be right is really useful. I know that AI can do some great things with big data and allowing organisations to look at where budgets are being planned, and I'd really be interested to know on you know, how the data we're now bringing in from the housing department can be used to kind of predict demand and kind of make sure that budget goes in the right places. I'm also really interested to hear about when residents may get to use tools. You know, I imagine there is going to be a date at some point when a resident could go online and they could say, ask a question as simple as, within my lease, can I lay laminate? Or you know, some of those, how frequently should cleaning take place? And these are things that are just embedded in documents around them. And you know, using AI as a tool to help residents actually find out that information without having to go to offices would be a really interesting area. So I'm just wondering where that might be in the work plan. Thank you.
So use of AI in housing, I think at the moment is limited to one system, which I think I skipped over by accident on the slide deck. So it's called Voicescape. And what it does is it analyzes tenancy data to understand tenancy behavior. You know, for example, what is the likelihood that this person might default on their rent and might need extra support, for example. And the way we set it up so at the moment is to make sure that we get the benefits from the insights of the data, but actually you then have a human being in the loop to make the final decision and make sure that any AI has made the right recommendation. I'll probably have to come back to you in terms of wider plans in housing. But in terms of how we can facilitate the resident experience, I don't know, Nicola, if you wanted to comment on that.
I think what you're describing is really like a chatbot that uses AI and can gather all the information from documents that are somewhere in the background. And I think those are areas that we're looking at as part of the Reignite programme. So we brought that, I think, to Cabinet a few weeks ago. So one of the areas that we're looking at is we're looking at AI to not target, that's not the right word, to get information as residents ring us, to be able to make sure that it's going to the right people to be able to answer their questions. So I think it's about using AI to make our services more accessible, which is something that Sam mentioned. And I think it's something we will be looking at through the Resident Experience and Access Programme second phase. So hopefully coming soon.
Councillor Dave's got something else?
I was just
Yeah.
going to say that, yeah, thank you very, very much. I've seen some kind of tools that are already out there for kind of just being able to take huge documents with hundreds of pages, and you can just then go and ask some really simple questions. And I think that's the kind of tool that's so very useful for residents, particularly around housing, when there's there's complex legal leases and information there. It would be really, really kind of an exciting area to get to. Thank you so much for those answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowbottom.
Thank you very much. So I'm Councillor Helen Rowbottom and I'm the chair of the Children and Education Committee. But actually, I'm kind of as interested in the in a broader corporate question, and perhaps this is to Sam, but Tina, please chip in fact, to both of you, is councils per se brokering this whole, brave new world. I wondered in terms of procurement, which I think as a sector, we're notoriously well, the whole of the public sector is very bad at procuring these sorts of things. I wondered how that voice is being articulated across the sector, what the most kind of enlightened ideas are on how we can value the input, particularly of data. And is there any discussion of a kind of commercial angle, i.e. kind of IP for access, or is it in a secure data platform that things are being accessed? Like, let's make, I personally think AI is the good AI is going to remove, there are many, I see your examples on the screen, I totally get it. When it's done wrong, it's a disaster. When it's done right, it removes unconscious bias, is unbelievably progressive, like radically transformational. But what I think we might lose, and I think is a bit of the elephant in the room, is the value for us in a sustainable model, which is actually more commercial than we usually see in council services, as it were. I wondered how councils are thinking about that.
Yeah, I think, in terms of leveraging our data at scale beyond even within a single council silo, let alone between councils, and there's very sensitive data like children's data, that the information governance hurdles for doing that at the moment are extremely significant. So I think no council's quite gotten to that stage with that sorts of data compared to other types of data. For example, you might be able to, leverage some different types of machine learning, for example, other types of AI to maybe find some insights. We haven't quite gotten, I think, to that stage specifically for children's data. That's kept very securely, rightly so, as it should be, I think. What we are doing is, I guess, as a sector, so we work with the LGA, with the Equalities Human Rights Commission and the Information Commissioner's Office. We're producing some guidance at the moment, and the Crown Commercial Service on procuring AI in an ethical way, so in terms of data governance and equalities duty, and working with Crown Commercial Service. So that's some guidance that we're going to have out to help councils. I think we're really keen to explore that. At the moment, I think it's just sort of making sure that we really embed, we have good procurement processes is a huge barrier. And the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, for example, put out a report in September that you can read purely on local authorities' use of AI and whether they're following their equalities duty. And I think they, in general, had pretty poor reflections on our meeting of our duties in local government. So I think the actual barriers in information governance and doing that well are very high for getting to that point where we could start to see some of those insights, which maybe we might see in other areas, I think. Does that partially answer?
It does, although I mean, I wouldn't, although I was speaking more corporately rather than the children's brief that I have, I wouldn't say that holding that data back is necessarily a good thing. I'm more interested in which way the data is securely held and what the value, how the value is captured both ways, because we talked about it in the previous session, so I'm just echoing what we had as a discussion last time, but the highest, the highest complexity equals the highest, spend, and also areas where things get missed. That information, it's almost like I would urge people in the public sector to compare it to the do nothing scenario versus the gently, 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 because we also have a responsibility, if technology is available, to procure it and use it. So I was more thinking about, given that, how we can make sure we capture the full value of that, so that we have, for instance, a not-for-profit fund that can go back into funding future services, something that becomes sustainable and captures the value for public good, so that we can make this something where we constantly have skin in the game, as it were.
Yeah, I think it's a great provocation. I don't think anyone in the sector's thinking like that in that space. I mean, in terms of that sort of insight, something we're doing in Lottie is in the housing area. We're doing a pilot deploying damp and mold sensors in homes, and we're developing data standards and a data platform so we can use that data all in one. We can do research and understand that better, apply, for example, AI to find insights, so we can do more proactive interventions and develop those insights. So I think that is something we're really keen to do in terms of practice, is try and get to that point where we can do that. I guess, yeah, I guess specifically answering with regards to children's, which I think is an area that is people are, and in the past have looked at, there are various tools around predictive analytics and things, and maybe had their fingers burnt a little bit because the tools didn't quite perform to the level that they thought they were and things like that. So I think it's right, I think, to be a little bit risk averse there, but I think in general, it's a really good suggestion that we should be moving in that direction, I think.
Can I just come in on the procurement issue? I mean, as Councillor Rowbottom says, public bodies have not always been the best at procuring services. This is a really fast-moving environment. There's probably companies out there developing things that would be helpful to us like every day of the week, and it's not like we have short lead-in periods for buying services and buying this in, and things can change very quickly. So we need to build that into our procurement strategy of any services that we buy. And so are we giving that some thought, and how are other local authorities looking at that? I suppose the other question is, are we in danger of kind of seeing, a very few big companies supplying a lot of this in the longer term, as opposed to us having a lot of choice about who we buy from?
I think there are various options in terms of where we go to when we start buying more AI. But in terms of embedding it into the procurement process, I think that's what we've done in the governance framework, because before, you go to the procurement process, we have to go through, the data privacy impact assessment. We have to make sure that, we've tailored the questionnaire specifically to the use of AI, so that we're aware of that even before we hit the procurement stage. And I think that's one of the reasons why we embedded it into the process. And we're also starting to track whether our suppliers who already provide to us start to use AI, because I think it's important to know so that we can manage that whole process, both for the benefits, but also for the potential risks.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan?
Sorry.
Sorry,
Oh, no, sorry, did you want to come on?
you wanted to?
I think
Point,
Tina
yes.
nailed it, but yeah, I don't know. I think there's, in fairness, I don't think there's a lot to add. I think that's the sensible approach. There is a bigger rules that make procurement in an agile way beyond AI really difficult that we can't change. So I think it's what we can change is the governance stuff. I think the other thing is really potentially investing in the skills of the people doing the procurement, so they're digitally savvy, understand what they're procuring, ask the right questions themselves, especially if it's not, you know, different in different councils, but not always completely centralized, that process. But that's all.
Joe McCormack.
Joanna McCormick's Director of Procurement, Commercial and Digital. So I just want to pick up on your procurement point. You're quite right in terms of the speed at which these pieces of kit are coming out and systems, etc. We've spoken to some of our key strategic partners in the commercial sector who, you know, on Monday they're buying one thing and by Friday they're buying another. Yes, there are a set of rules about how we do procurement and they're about to change in February with more stringent requirements. However, when we're buying things in the digital space, we do have scope to buy via a number of existing frameworks that are already set up, like at CCS or through other routes, which cut down the time that we need to take to procure things. And it's exciting to hear what's coming through that Sam was highlighting that CCS are going to bring out in terms of guidance to enhance what we do. I just want to share operationally, we now have a lead from digital on the contract, looking at any of the contract reports that come through for assurance ahead of coming through to members to consider. So we're getting all our kind of operational pieces together and checking off we've not missed anything. And that's been really fruitful in embedding what Tina was highlighting in the report today.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hyman. Sorry, the last response might have sort of said something about this, but what we've talked about so far seems to suggest that we'd be going fairly slowly on a lot of projects in terms of AI, which may be the right approach. In particular, a lot of the report and some of the discussion has been around, clearly there's lots of governance frameworks, there's a lot of technical work potentially to be done in that, which sort of, so one of the questions is, when might we see the benefits of some AI more generally across the council? Because it sounds as though there's a lot of work to do to ensure, you know, sort of get to a level that we're comfortable in terms of the safety of any of the AI that's there, which may, in a sense, hold us back from using a lot of it and therefore reduce any potential benefits, which might be the right answer. So I suppose the first question is around to what extent is the sort of governance and everything else that we'd want to see over that going to sort of reduce the scope for benefits, because we don't want to go that far. Although in due course we might learn from other councils and other public bodies about how that works. So I'd be, sorry, first of all, interested in any thoughts on that.
So I read a recent Gartner report on this exact point, and they said that companies that want to benefit from generative AI or AI in general need to get their governance right first, because there's no point in starting to leverage very powerful technology and then making a big mistake and then you've blown your reputation. So they actually advocate, get the governance right, make sure you're using it. In terms of benefiting from AI, so this particular AI that we've been looking at is generative AI. First of all, because it's quite new, we wanted to understand, you know, what it can and can't do. And actually, in terms of the individual licenses that we started testing with, because they were safe, again, research also shows that there's very little benefit to the organization. And we, as an organization, are in a place where we need the organization or the department to benefit. We're not in a place where we can, you know, assist all our workers much as we would like to. But if we can, you know, produce a tool that takes notes that everybody across the organization can use, we're giving benefit to many rather than paying for one expensive license for one person. So that's what we're trying to get to. I think we'll see the benefits when we scale up, but it is about understanding the technology and when is the right time to use it. Because, you know, generative AI is not going to be the only solution. Sometimes it's good old-fashioned automation, you know, using various different tools, where they're like integrating different systems.
Thanks. Yeah. So I suppose actually I'd couch, and perhaps it's asking the same question again, but so forgive me if that's the case. I guess the question is there an issue around corporately around sort of risk appetite of using different types of AI? And in a sense, where and maybe when will we see those sort of lines be drawn? I mean, we're talking about using it in terms of children's services and by way of example, and the confidentiality and the sort of everything over that data. So we as a council corporately might take one view as to the sort of whether we're prepared to actually go that far in terms of using AI in terms of elements of children's services or housing or whatever it might be. And I wonder, how are we going to sort of take those decisions? And strategically, when will you be able to articulate to us what those, sort of what the thinking is on those? Because there may be certain areas where we're saying we're not prepared to go to use AI there because the confidentiality of the information is such that, we just can't feel that, particularly, and it might be sort of cost benefit thing, I guess, in the sense that you have to spend so much money wrapping yourself up in the constraints that you need to put on yourself in order to get something out of it, that it wouldn't really be worthwhile pursuing it.
I think what we're trying to do is shape the approach with SLT. So, make sure that we educate ourselves so we can educate our leadership and jointly shape a strategy and an approach. But also I think it's, the benefits from AI. I think when we find use cases that work for us, that are worth investing in. So we know, for example, that it's worth using generative AI in the contact center, then we go for them. But as an organization, H&F has never been a first adopter. What we try to do is go for tried and tested technology. So I think in this approach, we're trying to balance the benefits of making sure we can still explore the opportunities and know how to adopt them safely, but at the same time, making sure that we're not making expensive mistakes.
Can I just ask about the Westminster City Council example? I think they were doing the sort of fly tipping and rubbish or something using AI. We've obviously got our Love Clean Streets, which I think when residents know about it, it's pretty effective. And I think I just wondered if there's feedback in terms of the sort of customer service chatbot angle, because I know certainly I find chatbots quite frustrating sometimes, but sometimes they can be really useful. It just depends on how complicated your question is in the first place. And I also noticed now that quite a lot of organisations, mainly selling, so somebody like Amazon, for example, now use AI to generate one overall review of something. So they'll take all the reviews of something and then they'll just make one which is really quite helpful. And I could see that there might be use for our services in that, in comments. And we get a lot of comments back about, I don't know, a particular, fly tip on one particular corner. Using AI, we can kind of use that data. So I just wondered how that was going in Westminster compared to something that we've got tried and tested, and I think works quite well in terms of our love clean streets.
Yeah, so in Westminster, I think they're a little bit of an anomaly, the tool itself, in maybe in other ways as well, but specifically with regards to the tool, I think it emerged out of a political commitment from the manifesto of the incoming council to reform the waste reporting service. And so the council invested a lot of resources to improving, really specifically with a focus on improving the way residents interacted with the tool. And so they spent a lot of money. They have 3 multidisciplinary product teams in-house, very highly skilled. This is not the usual way of working, very digital. Like there's pretty much only one of them in the country, and it's Westminster's team who made that tool in a council. There's maybe some larger in some of the combined authorities, but in London, that really does stand out. I think having that internal in-house capacity, they're really proud of that. They developed that in-house. But that did have a significant cost, obviously, for them doing that. So I think if you've got a good solution that's working well, I definitely wouldn't suggest. I don't think, in some ways, there aren't that many adoption lessons from that particular case. It's just, I guess, an example that if you wanted to go all in on with that particular outcome in mind, you could do that. And I think that's, when it comes to adoption, realizing the benefits a little bit, I think that's the key, is have the outcome you want to achieve. So whether it's adult social care and improving the way that social care workers can actually engage in the conversation and the speed at which it takes them to write up and process. They knew the outcome they wanted. It wasn't a case of we want to do AI better at a pan council level. It was a service level, very specific problem. And I guess that comes back to my point around it's around the design thinking. It's knowing what's the thing you're trying to achieve, how do you embed it? And then the technology is a tool to help kind of realize that. I think the generating a review as well is something that councils are looking at as well. The tricky thing is when it's the sensitive data going in, and there's the issue of hallucination where an AI model will put out something that might not be perfectly correct. And there are technical methods to go and try and ensure that is correct. But we've seen pilots, for example, with housing complaints where a worker, a council worker would get a review of all of the previous correspondence that might have been sent, rather than have to read through for 20 minutes, all these back and forth. They get that review summarized instantly for them, but then they still might have to go and check to double check it was correct and that they haven't missed a nuance there. So I think it's just, that's only one council done that pilot once and they haven't deployed it in a live service yet. It's still a pilot. So it's still very much, it's the early stage everywhere. I can maybe find one example. There's a chatbot, you can go onto Barking and Dagenham's website and see the public chatbot, but that's only trained on the public facing documents already. So you can't do anything with your internal data held there, but it's a fun one if anyone wants to go see it on a council website in action.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from committee members? No. Florian, would you like to comment on what you, as our lead member for digital?
Well, thank you, Chair. I think the discussion speaks for itself. I think we should just acknowledge the pool of talent that is sat around this table, and that this council has been taking this topic very seriously for a while. We've got, a cabinet member who's very much focused on this and pays great attention. I'm very thankful to work under, and I think the leader has been very wise to, seek expertise in this field from amongst ourselves. I mean, amongst yourselves too, councillors Daly and Rowbottom, you've made some excellent points, and everyone else too. We've got some really excellent officers who, for a local authority, we're not always top of the line in terms of adoption, but we are certainly in terms of thinking, in my opinion. But I suppose that since we last spoke about this was in April in this committee, and I'm thankful to you, Jeff, for bringing this back. Back in April, obviously, there hadn't been a general election yet. And so I thought that what I could tell you tonight is what we have seen since the general election. And in particular in the last few weeks. Some of you may know there's a bill called a data bill, which is the shorter term for the name of the bill, and that's been introduced, which essentially resurrects a bill that had been designed by the previous government, but it's removed some key elements. For instance, it's removed provisions to weaken data protection in the UK, particularly around consumers' data. It removes provisions to weaken the ICO, which was mentioned by the speaker to my left, to ensure that we have the right regulatory framework and consumer protection in the UK. So I think in this country, we're well positioned to make the most of AI, and I think we will together balance the two duties that we have, which are to, where it is possible, make savings and improve the delivery of our public services, but also ensure our residents' safety. So I'm very confident. I think something that's not been mentioned tonight, but I'm sure lots of the people around me are working on this, is the DAG, the Digital Accessibility Group, which is led by our excellent David Isaacs, which is a group of residents who test everything that we offer to roll out, from, again, the chat box or new forms, etc. And that really adds dimension. And I'm very confident that in this council, we've thought the right systems of checks and balances, internal boards, ethics groups, resident-led groups, to ensure that we make the most. So again, to anyone listening tonight, it's a journey. We're on this journey together, but with the people around the table, what they've said and what they'll continue to do, I am very comfortable and optimistic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ree, this is your cabinet responsibility. You've got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for this discussion as well. I think it's actually been really interesting talking through some of these big issues that councils and all sorts of organisations are going to be facing. I think Councillor Rowbottom said it best when she said this is a brave new world that we're going into when it comes to AI. I often think about how the office environment has sort of largely been the same now for quite a lot of years. You know, most offices, you go in, you've got your computer, your telephone, your desk tidy, and so on and so forth. But it wasn't that long ago that, I mean, longer ago than anyone in this room, I'm sure, has been working, but that people didn't use computers every day, right? I used to talk to older colleagues who said that they remember the time when they had to go and take their sort of handwritten notes over to a typing pool and wait a couple of days to have somebody type it up for them to look neat and presentable and send it back. You know, having a personal computer has changed the way that we go about working. It's made everything so much easier and far more productive. It seems to me that AI could have that sort of transformative power as well. Right? It could change the way that we go about doing all of our day jobs, no matter what it is, we're doing. And this is an area that is going to change an awful lot, and probably very quickly as well. Things that at the moment seem, you know, new and shiny and a little gimmicky, perhaps. Yeah, in a couple of years' time, we'll be doing all sorts of things that we haven't even thought of at the moment through AI, and so it's really important that we get the basics right now in terms of understanding how we're going to use this and what our controls and safeguards are going to be, so that as it develops, we're well placed in order to respond and to take advantage of it. I think Councillor Robotham was absolutely right when she said that we've got a responsibility to use technology where it exists and can benefit residents. Yeah. In my role, I often think a lot about, because I've got responsibility for finance, I'm often thinking about, you know, the responsibility of making sure that every penny of residents' money is spent properly. Well, that really matters when it comes to technology. You know, if there's something that we can do that speeds up a process for residents, improves a service for residents, or makes it cheaper to provide a service for residents, then you can do that through AI, then that's definitely something that we've got to look at, and something I'm very keen that we explore. I think Councillor Daly mentioned data and the importance that data is going to have, and that's absolutely right. These systems are only as good as the information that you plug in at the start. You know, what you get out at the end is only as good as what you put in. And as a council, we've got all sorts of data, you know, huge amounts of data about all sorts of aspects of people's lives. And so it's going to be important to make sure that we're using the right data when it comes to this. As Sam mentioned, you know, publicly available things are already available to the public. We can use that. We don't necessarily want to run the risk of giving out any information that shouldn't be in the public domain. But so that's why these safeguards are so important. Councillor Perez, you mentioned trust, and I think that's a hugely important part of the council's role here, making sure that we do maintain the trust of the public, that we make sure that they're comfortable that we can use these tools in the way that will best provide a good service for them and will protect their information and anything that they want to be protected. We always say in this council we like to do things with residents rather than to them. And so it's that approach that we'll be following when it comes to this, to make sure that we maintain that trust. But ultimately, the best way to win people's trust when it comes to this is by showing them the improvements that it can make. And so that's why I think it's really important that we get this right. And I'm very grateful to the work of the committee for making sure that we're getting a very robust process for setting out these frameworks at an early stage. And we're very lucky to have someone like Florian on the council with his skill sets and his knowledge of the area. And so it's been excellent working with him, and long may it continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think what stands out to me from the report and the presentations this evening is how far we've come since we had the first meeting about this, which was, 6 months or so ago. So I think, we've now got a proper governance structure in place. We've got, business case process for people to come forward when they've got ideas or something that they want to actually look at in terms of AI, and the procurement, I've had trouble with that tonight, which we've all mentioned. Obviously that process needs to be robust. So I think it would be really good, not soon, but just to have an update on how all of those things are going. But I think probably what the board would really like to see some real live examples when we start to have, implement this in certain service areas in terms of how it is working and what the feedback is from our residents on it. And I would echo Councillor Ree's comments about, we do involve our residents in designing anything like that. And our next report is actually an update on co-production, which leads me very nicely to the next item on the agenda. But could I thank everybody that's contributed. Thank you to our guest for coming this evening. And, we won't lose sight of this, but I do think, in the last sort of 6-9 months, we've kind of come such a long way. And it's really pleasing to see it in this report this evening. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we'll just take a minute while we change personnel. Okay, I don't think we need to change anybody else right now. So the next item on the agenda is an update on finance and corporate services co-production activities. As the committee will know, co-production is something that we have looked at this committee quite some time ago now. But quite a lot of the work we've done around digital inclusion has also involved looking at sort of co-production angle. We do have responsibility to see what is going on in finance and corporate services. I believe the PACs, we've got all the PAC chairs here this evening, should be looking at co-production within their service areas at some point to ensure that things are not just a tick box exercise, but we are actually doing things with people, not to people, throughout the organisation. So I would like to invite Nicola Ellis to talk to us this evening about what is going on in finance and corporate services in relation to co-production. So over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair. Nicola Ellis, Director, Corporate Services. I think there is an ambition that each department report regularly on the activities that we've fulfilled, that we've been co-producing with. And this is our first report as finance and corporate services. Co-production is actually coordinated within the finance and corporate services team. So we have the corporate co-production team as part of our communications team. So we are very ambitious about our co-production activities within the finance and corporate services department. And I think we have some good examples to demonstrate how co-production has helped us develop our services. And I think one of them was mentioned earlier when we talked about the digital accessibility group. The digital accessibility group is a group of residents who are from many different areas across the borough. They're a very diverse group of residents, and it is one of our co-production groups where it is not only disabled residents, it's other residents as well. So it's been really successful and really positive. And the team have worked on a number of things to date. Working currently on digital signposting. So as part of our digital inclusion strategy and working with the Alliance on the voluntary and community sector, we're looking at being able to signpost to other support available around digital inclusion. They worked really hard on developing the digital inclusion strategy, and now we'll move on to implementation and looking at achieving the objectives. Done a lot of work on the website and a lot of work around the cost of living pages as an example, and developing those for residents during times where they need additional support. And REAP, the Resident Experience and Access Programme, the Digital Accessibility Group have worked with and continue to work with the team on designing our new processes, our new self-serve options, new forms, and new information available on the website. So I think it's quite timely, really, when we talk about the AI adoption. I think the Digital Accessibility Group would be key to our adoption of that, and we work really closely with them in anything really in a digital capacity. So I think that that group would be really supportive of being involved in that. Other areas where we've co-produced is around the cost of living programme. We have worked very closely with many resident groups across the whole of the borough and all members of the Voluntary and Community Sector Alliance as well. And that has helped in terms of setting up the offering around our H&F Community Compass, which is a product that will enable residents to identify what support is available through the voluntary and community sector. And it's similar to the support that we will be having available for residents to find information on the digital inclusion strategy. So this will help with general support across all of the voluntary and community sector. And my voice is going. And the other important area that's included in finance and corporate services is people and talent. People and talent have been delivering a programme to all of our staff. It's in conjunction with Inclusion London, and it's, excuse me, it's about raising awareness of co-production and also around disability equality and the opportunities that we've got to really ensure that the borough is as inclusive as possible for everyone. So that team has also been supporting some of the events that we've had. Wellbeing Wednesdays have been delivered for all of our staff as well. So it's also about ensuring that we are working with our staff to co-produce the offering for them as well. We also run the EDI board in that area as well. Procurement. So the council's been working very closely with residents on procurement as well, which is part of finance and corporate services. We've had residents involved in designs for buildings where we've been procuring support for and involved in architects' plans. We've had co-production in the evaluation stage as well, and we have to be conscious of it's not always possible to have co-production throughout the whole of the process because of regulations, but we've had residents involved on specific questions and evaluating tenders relating to specific questions. And also looking at co-producing service models through market engagement as well. So I think overall, within the finance and corporate services department, there's a huge amount of activities going on and co-production happening, and it's really embedded within the service, within the department, and we can see the benefits of it going forward, particularly with residents helping us design the services as we change them and transform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Anybody got any questions? Councillor Rowbottom, yeah.
I wondered, because I was, this is all brilliant work that's happening. I wondered if we take a view of, you know, if our role is to represent all residents, do we, maybe with kind of an equity point that is standardised by, do we hold ourselves to account of reflecting the groups of people within our borough, i.e., you know, if people are working during the day and have less contact time with us during conventional office hours, are there ways in which we use different media to engage them as well, etc. You get their point, to try and build on excellent foundations to make sure that we reach people, you know, particularly given some of the services we've been talking about earlier, in a way that's really sophisticated and just can open up a whole new sort of level of engagement with our, I guess, our residents who we don't usually speak to. I guess if co-production is our aim, how are we mirroring everyone who we are providing for in the borough rather than certain groups?
That's a very good question. I don't know, Nicola, have you got any thoughts on that or?
So
I think, I mean, I completely understand in that we do have a lot of working residents. They do use, for example, some services, if not all of them, and they, you know, they're entitled to co-produce how we design them to meet their needs. But it may well be that, you know, they don't have time to come along to the meetings or to a public meeting or something like that where we're consulting on these things, but there's other ways of engaging them. We've just talked about it quite a lot, and we're doing quite a lot through our sort of like digital channels and our digital inclusion strategy as well. But it's how do we use those to co-produce to reach a wider group of people?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it's very important that we try and involve as many residents as possible when we co-produced, and we're not all using one particular group, because we won't get the benefits of it if we don't, you know, listen to all of our residents. So I think it's very challenging. It's challenging to co-produce with us. It's there's a lot of investment from residents needed in terms of time to be able to co-produce with us. And you're right, that doesn't, you know, some people won't have the capacity to be able to do that. I think it's interesting one for us to take away and think about, really, as to if there are ways that we can draw in more residents to some extent, even if it's not to the full extent of some of the co-production teams that we're working with at the moment. So I'll take that one away and talk to the co-production team about it, because I think it's a really valuable opportunity, really, to look at.
Yes, I should also say this is very much an as well as, and not an instead of. I just I wonder whether, for instance, when we go canvassing, we actually can't. There's nothing where we can immediately put information that we're fed back, which is often kind of really high value, and with people who you don't really catch in other ways in council services. And we, for obvious GDPR reasons, don't share that. But I wondered if there was some kind of consent where you could put something into an LLM, then you could read and churn through large bits of information, which I guess goes to your point, Nicola, is less onerous. But it's kind of a high volume information that could inform all the things that sort of on a previous tangent that we've spoken about before. So that it is less onerous on residents, but it feels more live and feels more en masse.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Ree, you wanted to come in on that point?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that's a really important point, actually. As a council, we spend an awful lot of time, rightly, thinking about the people who are interacting with the council most, you know, people who are benefiting from social care provision, people living in council properties, people interacting with social services and so on and so forth. But there's a big group of people who I try and think about quite a lot who don't, people who have very little interaction with the council and don't necessarily want to have any interaction with the council beyond having their bins collected once a week. And then, you know, generally just want to be left alone by us, right? And so I think that's why the Resident Experience and Access Programme is going to be so important. And that's changing the way that people interact with the council, making it far easier for people who don't want to spend a great deal of time, you know, on the phone to a switchboard operator, or, you know, scouring the website for the right email address or phone number for the particular department they want to talk to when they do eventually have a need to interact with the council. Creating that single one-stop shop is going to make life so much easier for those people who generally just want to be left alone, or, you know, just want to fill in a form once a year so that they can update their details and then ideally not hear from us again for another year. But yeah, I think they're an important group of people too, and it's important that we think about them and their needs.
Thank you, Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just coming on to a couple of examples here. So thank you very much for the report. I'm glad to hear about the amount of co-production that's going on in finance and corporate services. I thought two quite interesting examples, just by way of example, on the procurement side were right at the bottom here, which is that doing sort of pre-market engagement activity to inform and design procurement, particularly looking at working with local businesses that might presumably barriers for them tendering for business and actually engaging local businesses as opposed to perhaps going around out to wider, larger businesses. So my first question would be, I'd be interested in sort of understanding what you've learned as a result of doing perhaps a bit more of that than you might have otherwise done before.
Yes, so we did quite a lot of work with small businesses. Myself and team went out and worked with economic development colleagues on some of their engagement with small businesses and helped to understand what they did and didn't know about how to get a contract with us, where we have contracts available for them, but also how they might get onto supply chains and also what they would want to see taken into account in how specifications are designed to accommodate an understanding of how small business works versus massive business. Now, it's not the case that we can always procure things at that scale. There are value for money considerations or very complex things we need to buy from much bigger suppliers. But the opportunity to look at both what we do through supply chains and through direct purchasing where that's appropriate, and having that conversation directly with individuals was really valuable. And the things we learned were the kind of training and support that might need to be available. And we've since rolled out programs to support them, led by economic development colleagues, but we've stepped in and joined in as needed from a procurement point of view to provide further technical advice if people are struggling with, well, why do you ask that question, or how does the social value aspect work, or things of that sort. And I found it a really valuable exercise, and I very much enjoy engaging with that particular cohort of businesses in the borough.
And did we sort of do more business with smaller, medium-sized businesses in the borough, or nearby as a result of that?
So we have seen some more small businesses coming through into the supply chains on our contracts, but it is fair to say that it's less frequently that we buy very small contracts that we'd need directly from those small businesses, but we are aware of them. So if there were an ad hoc need that comes up where we haven't got someone to hand and we need to do something new, the world changes each day and different things come in, we have a whole cohort of individual businesses that we can then reach out to alert them to an opportunity when it becomes available.
That's very interesting. I mean, the second point was the one underneath that was about, similarly, I guess, about contract management with residents directly involved in ensuring suppliers understand what works and what needs to improve. I mean, that sounds like sort of what we should be doing, I guess, but I'd be interested in just the example here of this young inspector programme for semi-independent living, because clearly it's great if there are contracts out there that you're getting feedback from those people who are actually using the services that are provided, and that you're sort of then the lessons learned are going back around the chain so that the actual suppliers are actually then continuously improving their services in some ways. It'd be interesting to know what this example garnered in terms of feedback from the users of that service in order to sort of improve it further.
That one I would have to come back on more information on. It's led by Children's. Obviously, we assisted in that and wanted to share with you what we'd worked on contract management from finance and corporate services. But it is very exciting to see that whole cycle represented in those particular exercises, from design and specification, going out to procure it, and then following it through in the contract management at the end before you then think about what you might want to buy in 2 or 3 years' time. If we can replicate that in a number of different areas, we'll be onto a very good thing in terms of the quality of the services that we offer as an authority.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go into details now, but very interested in how that sort of evaluation takes place, such that you can then either tweak the contract a little bit or tweak the service midstream, or at least when you're then re-procuring it, you can sort of add in the lessons learned from that sort of co-production.
Happy to feedback further.
On that particular point, I mean, obviously procurement is quite a detailed and quite often a confidential matter for the council when we're buying contracts. So are there barriers to how residents are involved in our decision making on that, and the restrictions that would allow us not to perhaps engage as much as we would like to? Is there anything we might not be able to change but could be changed to improve that, do you think?
I think the best opportunity for anyone to affect a decision that then is results in us procuring a new service or programme of works is to be involved in the co-production of the design of that or the specification of that. Because the procurement process that then follows the tendering takes that and then asks a lot of detailed confidential questions about, okay, we want this, how are you going to deliver it in relation to what's been set out here, and then it scores against that. Yes, it is tricky, and there are limitations on what involvement there can be during the tendering process itself. And we've worked to ensure that residents are involved in questions that make most sense to them, the direct recipient of services, and how they respond to that, rather than dragging them into all of the technical detail of every different aspect of a tender. And one of the reasons for that is that if we hope it doesn't happen, but if at any point someone challenged what we did in that process, any of us who are involved in evaluation could be called into court, including the resident who was on the panel. And we don't want that to be the case. Obviously, that's a worst case scenario, not an everyday occurrence, but that's the reason why we have structured it in such a way to give the very best opportunity for people to be involved at each stage, but without opening anyone up to the complications of the legal process and that side of things.
Thank you. Councillor Perez.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to commend this report. I think it's a really good update, and it's great to see the efforts that we're making as a local authority in terms of our commitment to co-production. I really welcome the work that the Digital Accessibility Group is doing, how we are developing a signposting tool to improve that digital signposting, how we're working in collaboration with the voluntary and community sector to better support our residents affected with the cost of living crisis, and signposting them in the right direction in terms of the cost of living program and how we're responding to those needs. Also developing that digital inclusion strategy, and I think it's really good. I feel like as an administration and as an authority, we're leading by example in terms of working together with the residents. I had the great opportunity last week to attend a co-production away day, and it was very informative session to be able to come together with residents that have got that lived experience, with our co-production leads, with the different heads of different departments as well, to think about what we're doing right or what areas we could improve, and look at ways in which we can move going forward in terms of that commitment. So thank you very much. I think it's really good, and it's very positive, and I look forward as well to hearing updates from all the different departments. So thank you.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you for the report. It's really interesting. I am got quite a short question, in fact. I see that there, particularly in kind of procurement, but right the way kind of across co-production, there is something of a tension between how it's been done and how we know that kind of procurement has been successful, frameworks in that kind of area. The work that you're doing now in co-production, and not to get stuck in the last conversation, the last report, but what kind of that sort of data and AI and bringing all that data in, and where that would take us. Now, all three of those routes would be would be different, and they might be very, very different. And I'm just wondering how you're carving a pathway here to make sure that kind of what we're getting out of the co-production and the direction that's taking us in isn't battling quite so much with the direction that we could be going in if we use data. Thank you.
That's an interesting question as well. I guess there's a risk there, and is what you're highlighting, really, isn't it? That the co-production takes us in to a different direction, perhaps because that's probably a bit about knowledge, really, and us making sure that we're developing knowledge along with our residents. So as we've talked about all the artificial intelligence areas that we're looking at and how we're in early stages, I think really it's taking the residents that we're working with on that journey as well, so that we can look at basically educating each other, really. So we don't want to see that co-production becomes a barrier, and that residents become a barrier because they don't trust us and because they don't understand the way that data is being used. So I think that's a real important tool for us, the co-production, enabling us to work out what residents will be concerned about, and that inform our communication strategy going forward around artificial intelligence and the use of it and the use of data. So I think we can see it as an opportunity and work together on this journey towards wherever we end up with it, I think.
Any other questions? Can I just raise the community compass, because nobody else has, because I think it is a really good tool which has been worked on by a group of the voluntary sector. Can I just ask the question, is it actually now live or is it due to go live? I think Matt Sells may know the answer to this.
No, unfortunately, it's not live yet, but we're hoping to go live to the sector with it early in the new year. That's the plan. And then that will be inviting contributions from the sector in setting out the directory of their services and offer, including things like digital inclusion. So hopefully in the new year.
Could I just maybe you could just say exactly what it is, just for the benefit of everybody, because I mean I know, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure everybody does. So yeah.
So H&F Community Compass is the name we've given the signposting platform that Nicola referred to earlier. It's going to be an online directory of services for residents, VCS organisations, ourselves and anyone to search and look at what services are available in the borough against particular needs or interests. So we're really excited by it. We're hoping through doing that, residents will have better choice, better control on the sort of services that they can access. We'll also be reaching people earlier because residents will be able to self-serve, look and search for the types of services that are offered in the borough. So that is what Community Compass is. And
it was produced with the council, with the community.
Absolutely. There's a steering group involving one or two, from the DAG that was mentioned earlier, and some other people, council officers and so on. But yes, it's all being co-produced.
Thank you. Okay, any final questions or comments from anybody before we move on to the next report? Can I thank you for this report? We will keep coming back to this from time to time, because it is, as you get from, all of the members of the board, and I think from the councillors in the room, this is really important to us, that we make sure that we do co-produce across all of our services. So we will come back and have an update at some point, but can I just say thank you for the report this evening, and please keep us updated. So thank you very much. We'll now have a couple of minutes before we go on to our final report of this evening. Oh, still missing councillor Daly, I think, aren't we? So, 30 seconds. Well, welcome everybody. We've got the final report on the agenda this evening, which is a report back from a workshop that this board held in relation to greening the grey. It kind of crosses so many different departments in the council. It's very much part of our climate change. It's very much part of our transport strategy. It's very much part and integral to the industrial strategy as well, because there's so many things that relate to this that's held within the industrial strategy. So we thought it would be really useful to have feedback from the workshop that we held with a number of our residents in attendance. We've got the sort of two key responsible cabinet members here this evening, both who attended, and Councillor Daly also attended, so she may have some reflections on the day. But the idea is to actually get some real resident feedback in terms of, are we doing the right things? Where do we need to go? If we really want to make this borough a sustainable place where we're encouraging walking, we're encouraging cycling, we're encouraging alternative transport, and we're getting rid of lots of the grey and making us into a truly environmentally friendly borough, to actually see if we're going down the right track and how those thoughts from the workshop could feed into the different strategies that we are currently working on. So on that note, I think I'm going to ask Matt to introduce the feedback from the workshop, and then we've got various other people to contribute. Matt.
Thank you, Chair. So Matt, Sales Assistant Director. John, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I'm John Gorsworthy. I'm the Director for Climate Change and Transport.
Also joined by Sam Baldock, who's a policy officer and was the report author and organised the workshop. There's a presentation, if by magic, just summarising the report that's in your pack and the outcomes and findings from the work. Next slide, please. I think you've covered this, Councillor Homan. But yeah, this was about reimagining those corridor spaces, grey spaces, but also green corridors as well, and doing so to look at, how what we learn from it could inform future policy development. Next slide, please. I think you've covered all the two first points. The third, as part of the workshop, officers from John's area, there was a presentation on current council policies and opportunities in this area, and you've got some of those already listed there on which to build, things like our sustainable drainage systems, cycle routes, cycle storage, etc. There's a number of things we are already doing as a council in this space. Next slide, David. But why look at it further? Well, it's because this is an important part of the placemaking of H&F, those grey and green spaces. Also some key sort of facts and stats for you. So H&F is the second highest proportion of green spaces of all London boroughs and is the third most at risk for flooding. People will be very familiar. It's a busy old borough in terms of cars, trips, etc. 16% of our carbon emissions come from road transport, 1 billion trips per year. And the curbside, so is used by cars largely, which are parked 95% of their time in London. I think that's quite an important stat, and you can look at and think about curbside for more sustainable uses, such as flooding, such as other things. And part of this is also about this council's commitment to prioritise people, the safety, the accessibility, the health and well-being of our residents. Next slide, David. I'm handing to John now.
Some of the key sort of findings about how they want to use the space. I think it's kind of important to mention really on the reason why we kind of look at this is that the nature of how people want to use or interact with public space changes over the decades. And if you go back to Victorian times, what was there, and then the growth of the motor car through the 60s to now, and how there's a lot more active travel based. So making sure that our public realm reflects the needs of the people is really, really quite important from that regard. I think the other important piece to recognise is the public realm isn't just there for cars. Actually, there's a huge network of stuff underneath it, all the drainage, all the electricity services are all under there, and they need access to that as well. and that there's only so much space available. So for everything that you want to change the activity, something's got to give in order to do that. So reprioritizing that space is really, really key. When we've interacted with people and asked that, what responses they'll give will also depend on what frame of mind they're in as well. So someone who's a car driver who is thinking about their car trip will give you a very different answer if that same person is talking about when they're walking to the shops and the local things. So how they view the public realm, its importance to them changes based on their activity mode. So that's something really, really important when you interact with people. Next slide, please. But I think the key thing is, where do we go next? So as the chair mentioned about industrial strategy in its key part, one of the reasons why public realm is a key part of the industrial strategy is that not all of the public realm space in the borough is ours. It's on private land too. So if you think about Westfield and all around that area, there's a huge amount of public realm that's actually on private land, and how we interconnect and use that space and get the behaviours of people that make them the happiest is really, really quite important, and how they use that is quite key. In terms of the placemaking as well, as a key bit, one of the strong themes that was coming across is the importance of the public realm in enabling communities to interact. So that space for activity and interaction is really, really quite key. And the car dominance has meant most of the streets in London, and especially if we talk about AI that we did earlier with sat-navs, is trying to take most of the road network into the car space and using that for actual through traffic and taking it away from what people actually feel is important to them. So changing the focus from through traffic to placemaking is really, really quite crucial. In general, from our transport strategy perspective, we usually follow the line of the mayor. The mayor has their general transport strategy, and then we have to bid for schemes based on there. And some of the kind of feedback is that we're not bold enough in terms of our movement on that. So changing to be more active travel in terms of cycling, that has come across as a key theme. And I think the other important thing with the transport strategy is that the buses and that side of the bus network especially shares the same road space as the cars. So to take it away from the cars also takes it away from the buses. So that there's a bit of a rub between some of those modes of behaviours and the space we've got to play with. So we just have to be mindful of that. So the last piece is really what we're doing in terms of the environment and the protection of the public in terms of what the public realm can offer in space. So the green in the grey and the flood relief especially so is quite important. So giving up the space, as Matt said, where we've got parked cars for trees and drainage is actually quite crucial if you want to reduce the flooding impact to residents. And at some point, it's really getting across of what people are prepared to give. And probably what I'll end on that is one of the residents, was their closing comment was, be brave, be bold, you will be thanked for it in the long run. Was kind of I think it was a key message to come across in this space when we're looking at the policies.
Thank you. I will invite the cabinet members who were both there and Councillor Daly to comment as well, actually. I think key thing is, as well as sort of looking at items like AI and what have you, we do have a responsibility to sort of try and make a contribution to development policy as well. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of took this workshop forward, to see how we could maybe contribute to some of the work that is already going on. And I think it worked well, but I'd be interested to know if the cabinet members thought that was the case, and what we might do better if we take a topic like this again in the future, and where we go next in terms of trying to involve our residents as we move forward with such policies. Councillor Holder, do you want to go first? You're looking ready to go there.
Well, I would have to agree that the event went very well indeed. And more importantly, people understood the reason why they were there. I mean, the term green in the grey workshop is something that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily understand, but actually it was quite clear that people understood that what we were trying to do was to convert and transform the borough's streets and public realm, more importantly, from that look of grey in the main and into a more green environment. And they were very thankful to have been invited in most instances, certainly the people I spoke to. and contributing towards the policy decisions around improving the infrastructure for public rail.
Thank you. Councillor Harcourt, observations from you?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very much along the same lines as Councillor Holder. I found it a very, very useful day, very good to get feedback and input from residents. All too often we get very negative emails from people who don't want to see any change. Here we actually looked at people, and while there were one or two people with slightly more resistant, the majority of the people there were all very keen on moving this agenda forward. And it was quite interesting to see what their priorities were and whether we were doing it. I like that phrase, be brave, be bold, which seems to have been adopted, not just following that, but also by the Director for Public, what's it called? It's not Public Realm anymore, is it? It's called Place. Yeah, he regularly uses that when he's talking about climate change. From a climate change perspective, which is perhaps more my role, it's quite interesting to see how the work that we're doing and that people were coming out with impacted on that, because it's something that, as you said in your introduction, something that affects absolutely everybody in the borough, but also cuts across every single department over here. And you know, it's not just about climate change that people are looking at. They're looking at the wider aspects of things like the air pollution and so on, because our climate change policy focuses on carbon emissions, when in fact things like you know, the flooding, the increased rainfall, and also air pollution and such like falls into the same sort of category of work. And it's important that we don't forget that at the same time. The other bit that was important was, I think, which is very, very important, was how do we bring residents along with us? Because one of the things that we have regularly, I'm sure you all got it, if you ask somebody, what do you think about climate change, is it important? They'll all say yes. When it comes to, you know, making the changes in your area to your road and such like, then you start seeing the objections. Oh, you can't take out that, can't put a tree there because it's taking out a parking space. If you do such and so on, it's a problem. So it's looking at how do we overcome that sort of barriers, not necessarily the political barriers with a small p.
Thank you. Councillor Rowbottom, have you got a question? Yeah. I was gonna ask Councillor Daly if she had some observations, but you can ask your question if it's yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this workshop. I came out of it feeling inspired, really enthused. I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity to meet people with you know what is rightly being called brave and bold ideas. I kind of skipped ahead in my thinking and my ambition for the borough. I really loved the Rambling Society being there. I thought it was really incongruous to start with. We're, you know, central London, we've got the Rambling Society, but I really love their ideas about how we could kind of join up our parks and our green spaces and how we could make it pleasant getting to the park. And not everybody lives right on the border of a park. Some, you know, some of us have a much longer walk to get there. The idea of being able to create these lovely, safe, green routes there that are useful for everybody, you know, whether they are kind of just out for strolls or whether they're exercising, whether they're walking dogs, whatever that might be. I really like that idea. I suppose I kind of ran away with the enthusiasm, and lately I've been sort of anchored back in, because in my ward there is currently a consultation about school streets and rain gardens, and so I've kind of had a real front seat at looking at and listening to the different approaches that people take. And they are really very varied and all coming from exactly the right place. A lot of these are real concerns. I think I've sort of thought perhaps some of the accusations about a war on cars has been really misplaced. And I see a little bit of where that kind of originates from and the real worries that some people have. And I was really hoping that I could ask some questions here about making that argument, giving people to have the opportunity that I had to kind of sit and talk and listen to people with these big and bold ideas. You know, how we can not so much take people along with us, but actually light a fire for residents and let them kind of take it in kind of a co-production way. But, and whether we could, start making that argument, start bringing people, letting people kind of get enthused like I was. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rowbottom.
Thank you very much. I really welcome this, and I didn't know about the workshop. It sounds brilliant because it is one of those things that's very kind of everyday, visible. It goes to that point I made before about majority of people who live here, we all have an experience, like really deep experience of living here. So I think it's a great initiative. I had two points. The first one is in terms of the kind of conventional take on, through the eyes of residents, how it looks and feels. I wonder if we can have a function in our Report It app where, you can usually put like banged fly tipping here, where we have people pin suggestions on areas that they walk around and see, so that we slightly open it up. Because I know exactly, like, to take Councillor Daly's point, the contention between really quite extreme ends of the spectrum of people who are very climate conscious and really conscious of the air we're breathing in, even as they're cycling to work. I'll probably count myself among that. And then people who have a really legitimate reason to have a car, like they've got caring for someone, and they feel it's a very binary thing. I wonder if there could be the multiplicity of views that's captured on the app into something like that could help to not to take it out of the council's voice and give it to more people in a more democratic way. So that was one suggestion. And then the green, in terms of Councillor Harcourt, to your point, green in terms of like green tech and like the climate, things that maybe aren't so visible but contribute to the quality of the air we breathe in. One of the components of the industrial strategy, I don't know whether I'm breaking some sort of embargo by saying this, but it will have a component around, kind of how we can translate and democratize the access to some of the brilliant stuff happening at Imperial, including all of the green and clean tech, and actually be a better translator of it through to it being adopted across the borough. I'm thinking off the top of my head of Cyanoskin, the kind of reducing carbon paint that's currently painted on the roof of Scale Space, and maybe more. So things like that, it might not be as visible as people walking around and seeing it as part of the experience of living here, but contributes to the quality of buildings. Another great example is the School of Public Health, and Frank Kelly and his team there, a prof there, have the Well Home Initiative, which is looking at 50 homes in the borough and how we can, with people with asthma in it, and how we can make everything about the built environment better and reduce the health impact. So proper like public health in a really enlightened way. I guess I would just, on that point, it's happening, and I wonder how we can, it's already going to happen and be broken through with our kind of living labs or democratizing access piece. So it'd be great to feed that into, to have a kind of, you said we did, to deliver some stuff in response to, I'd be really interested to see it actually from the workshop about, if there are any notes, I'd be fascinated to read them. Thanks.
Just very briefly on that one, the work that Dr. Frank Kelly and his team are doing is absolutely amazing, and it's part of a process that's involving the NHS and ourselves as well, because one of the key issues in all of this is actually health, as I'm sure you're only too well aware, and getting the health message across is possibly one of the key messages that we need to get in terms of changing people's behaviour. I can't remember what the name of the group is that we're working with, who are actually, we've contracted to work on behavioural change. We've met them a couple of times.
Communications agency.
Yeah. You take it on board somebody who started doing some work on what is the current perception of people around climate change and such like, and how do we need to change it? What are the areas that we need to focus on? And they should be reporting back early next year on that. And that then feeds back into the work that we're doing with Frank Kelly and the NHS. Interestingly enough, just last week, one of the Dr. Collins from Imperial College, I'm not quite sure which department she is, but I was a school governor with her a while ago, came and got in touch wanting to look at actual physical pollution barriers along curbside. So, we're talking here about curbside and curbside things. We've done some planting, greening and such like, which absorbs all sorts of pollution. But this is actually a physical barrier, looking at those sort of curbs, you know, the ones which overhang slightly, and the effect they have on that. That would be very, very interesting, because a little while ago, it was the cycling lobby here did some work, a very unscientific one, has to say, but nonetheless, they had a number of NOx diffusion tubes at various points and looking at the levels of pollution. And the figures they were coming out with seemed to show that the worst levels of air pollution from cars and car emissions was actually at the height of baby buggies. Now, obviously, that needs a lot more scientific work doing on that, rather than a group of people say, let's just put one here, one here, one here, and these are the figures we're getting at. But nonetheless, I think, you know, it makes the point only too well. Linking health, climate change, and everything else together is oh so important.
Strongly agree. It's
Thank
really
you.
interesting.
Councillor Perez.
Thank you. A quick question, please. So what's the boldest and bravest suggestion that you received that day from the residents or from the groups that took part in this activity?
Well, we're interested because we have had further kind of workshops with local residents. So one of the roads up at Harwood Terrace, which had huge amounts of traffic many moons ago, and we've been talking about them about doing some environmental improvements to their street, and we gave them the traditional style of the humps, you know, the thing, and they went, oh, yeah, that's okay, not really that interested. So, okay, we'll go to the totally radical, which is the trees, planting, all of the drainage, and fundamentally change the space and make it more like an architectural garden. And it was, yes, love that, we want that. So actually, we found is the bolder and more out there we were with it, the more transformational we were, the more support we got.
Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I should say, sorry, I'm very interested in the report. I'm glad to hear it went so well. I think that Councillor Holder has done a great job here in that a number of the initiatives that are suggested are actually going on already, as far as I'm aware. So I'd certainly recommend, if you can, I'm sure it's true of Councillor Trahey's pack as well, that I'd recommend the minutes of the Economy, Arts, Sports and Public Realm pack from the past 2.5 years, because a lot of these initiatives are already in progress as far as I can tell. Although it would be interesting to know what, in addition, people are, so what the sort of kernel of the extra might be. So, I mean, just looking at some of these key workshop findings, for example, and I think it would be useful if, in sort of looking at them, they were sort of rejigged and prioritised, because some are quick wins that could happen and some are, I'm afraid to say, much longer term aspirational things. So, for example, we have discussed regulation of utility companies to minimise roadworks. And I'm afraid to say that's probably going to take primary legislation to not allow utility companies to come along and dig the roads up. So I think that's unlikely, for example, but no doubt an aspiration. We have discussed sustainable drainage systems recently. I mean, one of the things there, as with a number of these initiatives, is really getting out the understanding of what we're doing and how well that is working. So I know we have a number of SUD schemes in the borough. It'd be useful to actually illustrate, and I think we raised this at perhaps last week's meeting or recent meeting, how well those are working at the moment in terms of some of the major rainfall events that we're getting. And I guess we're getting storms more regularly, and I notice communication is part of this. Similarly, and although not the sort of cycle storage, I guess the other point is that we have got large amount of money to improve that, and clearly all of us as ward councillors are no doubt pushing for particular extra cycle storage in our wards. I mean, one of the other things is, of course, the tree strategy is being or has been consulted on recently, and we are looking to increase the canopy, I guess, across the borough. So I guess this feeds directly into that. I think there are, and again, I'll refer to the minutes of the meetings, there are pros and cons as to exactly how much you can get into curbsides and how all of that works, particularly in regard to the highways. So I could go on, but I'll perhaps stop there. But I think the, for example, we actually talked about the Parks Satisfaction Survey last week. And of course, some of that was brought out issues around lighting, accessibility and safety. So I think that it would actually be useful to sort of rejig some of these things, match them up to what's going on already. I noticed that culture was discussed here, and there's been the long-running sort of cultural strategy, which is now the cultural compact. So I think a lot of this stuff is sort of being delivered. It would be useful to sort of understand, you know, to sort of engage exactly how that's been done, and to sort of feed back to the people who took part in the workshop. But I mean, that there might be a sort of aspect of joining all of those initiatives up so that there's a better understanding of exactly what's going on, to identify what, if any, sort of gaps there are in that, the offer and the initiatives that are going on. But well done, Councillor Holder, in getting all of these initiatives down.
Well, often people don't realise when you use those simple words like public realm, how big that actually is. And just for clarity, we're talking highways, waste, transport, parks, cemeteries, culture. All of that is covered under public realm, bizarrely. But what it does, it allows the team to be able to work with and around and across each other's works, so that work that is going on, for example, in highways at a time, we, rather than digging up the road, doing a piece of highways work and then stopping, repairing that work and then starting again 5 minutes later to create something else. We now have a system in place where all of that works together, and we ensure that work that we plan to do over a period of time is grouped together and it happens at the same time. Equally, when we want to put lights in or change lighting in, that can also be done equally at the same time. So that is going on behind the scenes, I think it's fair to say. And thank you very much, Councillor Vaughan, for highlighting that. But I think what you've pointed out is that we might know it's going on, or certainly public realm does, and it's working together. But clearly the public needs to know that better. And I think that's something that John and I and Councillor Harcourt will take away with us today and try and do better in terms of communicating that work and how it goes on and how it knits together for everybody.
I would say I will ask the question, answer the question, because you kind of raised what's kind of different to some of the initiatives that's going on. I think what the workshop highlighted was the importance of communication. I think Councillor Daly's kind of point really highlighted that you have to have the conversation and get people on the same page. And sometimes it does mean, you know, you'll meet residents, they'll agree with something, and then they'll go over somewhere else the next meeting and they'll come back, and there'll be this ebb and flow as that conversation builds and the understanding builds until you can get to a place where actually you've got common consensus of the way forward. And us taking the time and that sort of consultation with people has been the change that we've done. And I know Councillor Trey's been experiencing that in her own ward with us coming there and having the meetings. So that's been the biggest change of how to get that integration.
Councillor Trey, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. The workshop sounds fantastic. I'm very disappointed I couldn't make it, actually. I think the things that everybody's talking about that have come out of this is about communications. I mean, one of the things I was kind of going to ask was about the who we got to come to the workshop and how successful getting all these people in the room was. That bit of organisation was done so well to have the rambling, you know, associated, the different people represented, because, you know, going back to one of the last reports is about co-production, and I was just some of the thoughts that were coming up with gender in spaces in public realm, that so often we've had a masculine view of the world for so long that has dominated that the female and perhaps even the family, going back to the buggy question, has sort of been lost by the sort of possibly the narrative of the male hegemony of the space, particularly the car as well. So I think we've got learnings there about how this workshop came together, but also about the fact that the workshop is a part of consultation, and we are criticised so often at the council of not speaking to residents that quite often, again, back to the communications, is communicating that we are having these consultations. My ward, Wormholt, has had 2 fantastic meetings with concerned residents about traffic and the impact on their local spaces. So it is how we see. I think it's really fascinating that Councillor Holder was talking about that seeing of things across the council, that we're working to relay and work together across departments. So thank you very much for that. I don't know if any of those were questions.
I just want to commend Councillor Trey for a Judith Butler style energy of male hegemony being mentioned in a meeting. Fabulous.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think what's clear is if you look at all of the sort of people that attended on page 50, whereas we do a lot of really good consultation where we are, like your traffic issue, you know, like the clean air neighbourhood, we've done specific, very particular consultations and very particular, you know, work with particular groups. This was a sort of much wider range of interests, which I think was really interesting in that they kind of had pretty much similar views on things that we are, you know, we should be doing. And I think in terms of the communication, because they were a very wide range of groups with different experiences of different bits, like, you know, there were cyclists and like, you know, the people in the clean air neighbourhood, etc. They didn't know all the other bits that we're doing, which kind of links up to the communication issues. So I think it was worth doing, and we will have a look at how we can do that with other policy areas that we're trying to develop as well. And obviously this feedback will go into things as we go forward, and we'll try and take it. I know the Ramblers Association, I know that they are very interested in this sort of green corridor and working with us on that. So I think it was well worth it. And just thank you to all the officers that supported me in putting it together, and for everybody that attended. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for attending this evening to discuss it. Which leads me to the sort of last couple of items on the agenda. Agenda item 7 is the PAC reports. Has anybody, it's essentially the work programmes I think you've all got lined up. Does anybody want to raise anything about their particular policy and accountability committees? Anything they want to highlight, low light, comment on? No. Sorry,
Just a really quick one for me to say that, and I'm mindful of the co-production lens, and children's are exemplary for it, so I'm looking forward to talking about that at a future.
Great.
Meeting.
Okay. Yeah, it would be useful if I don't know if you've all got co-production on your agendas, but at some point it's probably easier for some committees than others, but it should be coming to have a look and see what co-production has been doing, so that we can, that's what was one of the recommendations this committee made right at the beginning, I think. So it'd be useful. And any other comments on your packs? Anything you want to talk about? No? Okay, has everybody noted the report? Okay. So the final item is the draft work programme. In February, we will be looking at the budget, the corporate budget, the council's budget, and we'll be looking at corporate performance indicators. It's going to be quite a technical meeting in February. And then we've still got a couple of items to be scheduled, and we've got in May, I've called it the drug strategy. I don't know whether it's going to be called the drug strategy, but there's an enormous amount of work going on in relation to drug, antisocial behaviour, crime, which has been coordinated at a very strategic level across the council at the moment. And there's a strategy being developed, which I thought it would be really useful because it's so cross-cutting and quite a pertinent issue for lots of our residents at the moment. I thought it'd be really good report to bring here. So all suggestions are welcome. Please get in touch with me if you've got other suggestions. And The next meeting is the 5th of February. Could I just thank everybody for coming along this evening? Thank you. Thank you.